You could not build a Great Pyramid today, even with $1 billion and a fleet of modern heavy machinery at your disposal. That sounds like a radical overstatement or some kind of romanticization of the past, but in terms of logistical endurance, structural precision, and the sheer defiance of physics, we have actually regressed as a species. Everything you have been told about how ancient humans built their monuments is fundamentally backwards. We start from the assumption that because they lacked electricity and internal combustion, they must have been primitive, struggling to drag heavy stones through the dirt while being whipped by cruel overseers. We assume that because we cannot easily replicate their work today without a massive carbon footprint, there must be some missing high-tech secret, or perhaps a helping hand from somewhere else entirely. But the truth is far more uncomfortable for our modern ego. Ancient engineers didn't succeed despite their lack of technology. They succeeded because they mastered the fundamental laws of the physical world in a way we no longer can. They didn't have tools that did the thinking for them, so they had to outthink the stone itself. They didn't have fossil fuels to provide infinite force, so they turned their own societies into the most efficient machines ever designed. Take the statues of Easter Island, the Moai, which for decades were treated as a prime example of an impossible engineering feat. You've likely heard the standard explanation that thousands of people must have used thousands of trees to roll these 80-ton giants across the landscape on log rollers, a process so resource-intensive that it supposedly caused the total ecological collapse of the island. It's a neat, cautionary tale for the modern world, but it's completely wrong. The local Rapa Nui people have always said the statues walked to their destinations. For a century, Western archaeologists laughed at this, categorizing it as charming folklore. Then, in a series of groundbreaking studies culminating in 2025, researchers like Carl Lippo and Terry Hunt proved that the islanders were telling the literal, scientific truth. By analyzing the center of gravity on unfinished statues, they found that the Moai were specifically engineered with a D-shaped base and a deliberate forward lean. They weren't meant to be dragged, they were designed to be rocked. By using just 3 teams with ropes, 1 behind to stabilize and 2 on the sides to pull, a remarkably small group of 18 people could make a 5-ton statue walk across the rugged terrain, mimicking the exact gait of a human being. The statues didn't need rollers, they needed a rhythm. When you see a Moai today, you aren't looking at a heavy rock that was moved, you are looking at a machine that was walked. But while a walking statue is a brilliant demonstration of mechanical advantage, it's a relatively simple trick compared to the architectural mountains of Egypt. We still cling to the myth that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built by hundreds of thousands of slaves toiling under the heat of a desert sun, a theory popularized by the Greek historian Herodotus and fueled by Hollywood epics. The reality discovered by archaeologists like Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass at the Height El Gorab site, the lost city of the builders, paints a completely different picture. This wasn't a labor camp, it was a highly organized, prestigious city designed to house and feed an elite workforce of roughly 20,000 people. We know what they ate. Excavations have found enough cattle, sheep, and goat bones to suggest the workers were being fed prime cuts of meat daily, a diet far better than the average Egyptian citizen of the time. They had dedicated bakeries that produced thousands of loaves of bread and medical facilities where workers received high-quality bone setting and even brain surgery. This was a national project that functioned more like a modern space agency than a construction site. The workers were organized into phils, or crews with names like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaure. They weren't being driven by a whip. They were being driven by a religious and national fervor that allowed them to move 2.3 million stone blocks with a level of precision that modern architects still struggle to explain. Moving those blocks, however, presents a friction problem that should have been insurmountable for a society without the wheel. If you try to drag a multi-ton limestone block across dry sand, the sand eventually bunches up in front of the sledge, creating a mound that makes further movement impossible regardless of how many men you have pulling. For years, Egyptologists looked at ancient wall paintings, specifically one in the tomb of Jehudi-Hotep, showing a man standing on the front of a sledge, pouring water onto the sand. It was long assumed this was a ritualistic gesture, a libation to the gods to bless the journey. It wasn't. In 2014, a team of physicists from the University of Amsterdam, led by Daniel Bohn, discovered that this ritual was actually a sophisticated application of fluid dynamics. If you add exactly the right amount of water to sand, typically between 2 and 5% of the sand's volume, you create capillary bridges between the grains. This doubles the stiffness of the sand and prevents it from bunching up, reducing the required pulling force by a staggering 50%. The ancient Egyptians had figured out the rheology of granular materials 4,000 years before we had a name for it. They turned the desert itself into a low-friction highway by understanding the microscopic behavior of a single drop of water. And yet, reducing friction on the ground doesn't explain how they got those stones nearly 500 feet into the air. The traditional long ramp theory, a single straight ramp leading to the top, has been mathematically debunked. To maintain a functional grade for hauling stones to the summit, the ramp would have needed to be over a mile long and would have contained more material than the pyramid itself. No evidence of such a massive structure exists. This is where the internal ramp theory, proposed by French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, changes the entire narrative. After years of 3D modeling, Houdin suggested that the builders used a small external ramp for the base, but then switched to a spiraling internal tunnel built into the structure itself. This allowed them to haul stones up the interior, using the corners of the pyramid as turning stations, where the stones could be rotated using simple wooden cranes. This theory was met with skepticism until a 1986 microgravimetry survey of the pyramid accidentally revealed a hollow spiral-shaped density anomaly running through the entire structure. The pyramid isn't just a pile of rocks, it is a hollowed-out, multi-stage delivery system. They didn't build a ramp to the pyramid, they built the ramp inside it. Of course, knowing how to move a stone isn't the same as knowing how to place it with a precision of 1/15 of an inch. We often look at the sheer size of ancient megaliths and forget to look at the gaps, or rather, the lack of them. At sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia or the Great Wall of Giza, the stones are fitted so tightly that you cannot slide a razor blade between them. This wasn't achieved with lasers or high-powered saws. It was achieved through a process called scribing and coping, a technique still used by master log cabin builders today. By using a simple tool to trace the irregular surface of one stone onto another and then patiently grinding away the excess, you can create a perfect, interlocking fit that accounts for every microscopic bump. It's not a secret technology, it's a secret of patience. Modern construction is based on the idea of good enough. We use mortar and shims to fill the gaps left by our imprecise machines. The ancients didn't have mortar, so they couldn't afford to be imprecise. They spent thousands of man-hours on a single joint because, in their world, time was the only resource they had in infinite supply. But it's easy to get distracted by the technical details and miss the even bigger myth, the idea that these methods were unique to one super-civilization. If you look at the trilithon stones at the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek, Lebanon, you'll see 3 blocks weighing 800 tons each, perched 20 feet in the air. If you look at the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, you see a single piece of granite that would have weighed nearly 1,200 tons. Across the globe, from the Neolithic tombs of Brittany to the massive fortifications of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, humans were using the same principles. They were using the 2/3 rule of leverage, where a small amount of force applied over a long distance can move an object of nearly any weight. They were using counterweights to turn gravity from an enemy into an assistant. In 2001, a retired construction worker named Wally Wallington demonstrated this in his backyard in Michigan. Using nothing but wooden beams, small stones to act as pivots, and his own body weight, he single-handedly moved a multi-ton concrete block across his yard and stood a 20-foot-tall stone upright. He didn't use a crane, he used physics. He showed that one man with a clear head can do the work of 100 men with strong backs. The ancients didn't need thousands of people for every task, they needed a handful of people who understood the balance of a pivot point. Despite the brilliance of these mechanical pivots, the real engineering marvel wasn't in the stones themselves, but in the logistics of the human machine. To build Stonehenge, the builders had to transport blue stones from the Preseli Hills in Wales to the Salisbury Plain in England, a journey of over 180 miles across hills and water. This wasn't just a test of moving weight, it was a test of social endurance. It required different tribes, potentially speaking different dialects and holding different territories, to agree to a common goal. This is the part of ancient construction we find the most impossible, because it's the part we are the worst at today. We are used to top-down corporate management. We are used to short-term contracts and quarterly profits. The ancients worked in generations. They started projects they knew they would never see finished. They maintained a level of social cohesion that allowed 10,000 people to work in perfect sync without a single radio or computer. The secret of the pyramids isn't a levitation device. It's the fact that 10,000 people could be convinced to pull a rope at the exact same second for 20 years straight. But if we acknowledge that they were this capable, we have to acknowledge a terrifying contradiction in our own timeline. We view history as a straight line of progress, where every generation is smarter and more capable than the one before it. But if the ancients could achieve this level of permanence and precision with nothing, while our modern skyscrapers have a projected lifespan of barely 100 years before the steel rebar begins to rust and swell, then our line of progress might actually be a circle. We have traded durability for speed. We have traded understanding for automation. We look at a 1,000-ton stone and call it a mystery because we can't imagine doing something that doesn't offer an immediate return on investment. The mystery of ancient construction isn't, how did they do it? We know how they did it. We have the tools, we have the physics, and we have the records. The real mystery is, why did we stop being the kind of people who could? This brings us to the uncomfortable reality of the countermyth. We aren't the peak of human capability looking back at a primitive past. We are the specialized descendants of generalist geniuses. An ancient builder had to be a geologist, a physicist, a surveyor, and a master of human psychology all at once. They understood the grain of the rock and the moisture of the sand. They knew how to listen to the stone to hear when it was about to crack under pressure. Today, we have apps for that, and because we have those apps, we have lost the intuitive connection to the physical world that made the impossible possible. We look at the megaliths and see aliens, because it's easier to believe in extraterrestrials than it is to believe that our ancestors were simply more disciplined, more patient, and more unified than we will ever be. We have built a world of plastic and glass that will be dust in 5 centuries, while their work remains, mocking our definition of advanced. The most enduring myth of all is the idea that they were fundamentally different from us. We like to think that their brains worked differently, or that they possessed some lost spiritual energy that allowed them to float stones through the air. This is a comforting lie because it excuses our own lack of greatness. But the biology of the human brain hasn't changed in 50,000 years. The people who built the pyramids were exactly like you. They had the same capacity for boredom, the same desire for comfort, and the same fear of death. The only difference is what they chose to do with their collective time. They chose to build for eternity. They chose to turn the earth itself into a testament of their existence. When you stand in the shadow of a megalith, you aren't looking at the work of a god or a visitor from another world. You are looking at a mirror. You are looking at what a human being is capable of when they stop looking for a shortcut and start looking at the physics of the world around them. But don't let that realization bring you too much comfort, because it comes with a cold, undeniable truth about the world you live in right now. We live in a civilization that is remarkably fragile, held together by a thin web of electricity and global supply chains that we barely understand. We take for granted that our heavy lifting will always be done by machines and that our structures will always be designed by software. We have forgotten the language of the earth. If the lights went out tomorrow, you wouldn't know how to move a 5-ton stone an inch, let alone build a monument that could withstand the next 4 millennia. We call them primitive to hide the fact that they were more resilient than we are. The Great Pyramid has survived the collapse of every empire that has tried to claim it, while the building you are sitting in right now will likely be a pile of rubble before the next millennium even begins. The ancients didn't have technology, they had something better. They had a mastery of reality that we have traded for the convenience of a screen. So, the next time you hear someone say that humans couldn't have built the ancient world, remember that they are actually telling you something about themselves, not the past. They are telling you that they have lost the imagination to see a human being as a force of nature. They are telling you that they have become so dependent on the machine that they can no longer see the man. The stones of the ancient world aren't a puzzle to be solved, they are a challenge. They are a standing invitation to remember that physics doesn't change, but human will does. The people who built the world's wonders didn't have secrets. They just didn't have excuses. They understood that with a long enough lever and a place to stand, you can move the world. We have the lever, we just don't have the stomach to stand where they did. While we obsess over finding the trick or the hidden tech, we ignore the most obvious evidence right in front of our eyes. The marks on the stones are from copper chisels and stone hammers. The ramps are still there, buried under the sand or hidden in the walls. The worker villages are filled with the bones of people who worked themselves to death for a vision bigger than their own lives. There is no mystery, only a massive amount of evidence that we find too exhausting to accept. We want the answer to be magic because the alternative, that it was just incredibly hard, incredibly slow work, is too demanding. It means that we are responsible for our own greatness, and that is a terrifying weight to carry. It's much easier to pretend they were helped by a higher power than to admit that we have simply become lazier than our ancestors. But even if you accept the physics and the logistics, there is one fact that should genuinely keep you up at night. For all of our talk of progress and all of our sophisticated engineering, we have yet to build a single thing that will last as long as the structures built by primitive humans 4,000 years ago. Our longest-lasting modern creations, the Hoover Dam, the North Sea barriers, our nuclear waste repositories, are designed to last for a few centuries, maybe 1,000 years if we're lucky, and they require constant, active maintenance to keep from failing. The Great Pyramid has stood for 4,500 years with zero maintenance. It has been stripped of its outer casing, shaken by earthquakes, and climbed by millions, and it still remains the most massive and precise structure on the planet. It doesn't need us to survive. It is a permanent fixture of the Earth's crust. It is a cold, undeniable fact that if every human died tomorrow, our cities would vanish within a few centuries, swallowed by forests and oceans, leaving behind nothing but a thin layer of plastic in the geological record. But the pyramids will still be there. Stonehenge will still be there. The Moai will still be standing on their platforms, staring out at an empty ocean. We have spent the last 200 years building a world that is designed to be replaced, while they spent their entire existence building a world that was designed to be permanent. You are living in a temporary world, surrounded by temporary things, and you are being told that you are more advanced than the people who conquered time itself. You are not the architect of the future, you are just a tenant in a house that the ancients built better than you ever could. When the last of our steel has rusted away and our concrete has turned back to dust, the stones they moved with nothing but rope and water will still be standing, a silent, heavy proof that you were the one who was primitive all along. What do you think our civilization will actually leave behind that could possibly stand the test of 4,000 years? Think about that the next time you look at the skyline of your city. Everything you see is destined to disappear, while the things they built, without tools, are functionally immortal. We aren't the ones who figured out how to build everything. We are the ones who forgot. We are the ones who chose the easy way, and the price of that choice is that we will be forgotten while they remain. The ancient world isn't a mystery, it's a standard we no longer meet. It is a haunting closing argument for a version of humanity that was stronger, smarter, and more unified than the one looking at the screen right now. You are walking through a world of ghosts who were far more capable than you are, and the only thing they left behind is the crushing weight of their success. Subscribe if you want to keep digging into the parts of history that modern society would rather you forget, and let me know in the comments. If our civilization collapsed today, what is the one thing you've seen that you think would actually still be here in 4,000 years? Because the more you look at the data, the more the answer looks like a whole lot of nothing.